Cool. Let's get started. Thanks everybody for coming out, especially this late into your DrupalCon experience. You're all the real troopers. So this is the Drupal API Client. I am Brian Perry. It's been great being here at DrupalCon. Never been to Barcelona before. It's wonderful. This is me surfing in one of Barcelona's wonderful oceans, which is definitely a thing I can do for real. I am from the Chicago suburbs in the US, longtime Drupal front-end developer. I've enjoyed building with components, and increasingly have been interested in how Drupal and modern JavaScript frameworks can work together, be it on decoupled projects or exciting wild things that are happening in the Drupal community currently. I also love Nintendo. I am currently finishing up Paper Mario and the Thousand-Year Door, the remake, which is really great, but a little too long, and wore my celebratory, very subtle Zelda Hawaiian shirt here because it's a launch day for a new Zelda game, which is amazing. I also work for Chapter 3, and I really appreciate Chapter 3 sending me out here, which is fantastic and wonderful, so I can speak to all of you. Chapter 3 does a number of decoupled projects. We recently launched a large decouple site, the National Association of Realtors, on Next Drupal. And we also maintain the Next Drupal project. And I also want to thank my previous employer, Pantheon, as they've also sponsored time on some of the projects that we'll be talking about today. But yes, so we're here to talk about the Drupal API Client project. This is kind of like a nice milestone talk, kind of talking about what we were able to accomplish with the project and what potentially could be going on in the future. So what it is, it's a set of JavaScript packages to source data from common Drupal APIs. And another kind of part of the initial pitch and concept here was that something like this should live under the Drupal namespace on NPM. That hasn't happened yet, so still currently a dream, but we'll talk about that idea a little bit more. And for anybody who was involved in DrupalCon North America, this is also one of the Pitch-burgh funded projects. So they had a contest where people could submit project concepts, and we got selected by the community and funded for $10,000, which was amazing. But for better or for worse, that now makes this a $10,000 question. Why does Drupal need this kind of project? So I certainly have some opinions on that. One of them, I think, can be told by doing some searches on NPM, as all great front-end developers do. These screenshots are a little bit out of date, but I think the concept still comes across. So if you search for Drupal, you get kind of a confusing set of results, especially if you're a front-end developer that's new to Drupal. So the first result here is an implementation of parts of Drupal's user/access control API. And then there's a next Drupal web form package, something for image styles, which I'm sure are useful, but pretty specific. Then there's Drupal SDK, which is that Drupal's SDK? Is that a Drupal provided package? Would be hard to know if you're new to this. Drupal also has its own org and namespace on NPM. So if you know to look for that, this is what you would find. There are currently 4 packages under the Drupal namespace on NPM. One is Once, the replacement for jQuery Once that's used by core. There's an accessible autocomplete project, and then a couple of packages that were built as part of the decoupled menus initiative. But again, these are all pretty specific, packages. On the flip side, if you search for WordPress, no controversy related to WordPress this week, which is good. But if you search for WordPress, you get more of what I would expect here. First thing, a client working for WordPress. There's a Gatsby plugin, which is probably lower on the results now, given the state of the Gatsby project. But also a lot of packages under the WordPress namespace that are related to Gutenberg, but could be used outside of the context of Gutenberg. But in general, this feels like more what I would expect as a front-end developer new to WordPress, and tells me that WordPress is serious about JavaScript. And then it's not a completely fair comparison, but if I was a developer that was working with Contentful, and I search for Contentful, again, this is more what I expect with the results. So Contentful is a completely headless CMS. So you would definitely need packages like this to be able to interface with Contentful at all. But they have a client for the Contentful Content Delivery API and a number of packages scoped under the Contentful namespace. But regardless, I think as a front-end developer who is working with a CMS, this is something that you would do. What are the utilities that are out there provided by this platform that I can use? And we don't really have a great representation currently. Also, another reason that I think this project needs to exist is that people have been solving it in similar ways over and over. So there are multiple competing projects, and competing in the friendly open source way, not necessarily bad vibes here, but so I previously maintained a project called Drupal State, which I kind of consider this project to be a successor to. There's a Drupal SDK, Next.js for Drupal has its own client, Nodehive has its own client as well. And yeah, this project has been solved repeatedly. And a lot of these clients look pretty similar. So this is an example with Drupal State. And here you're importing the package and then creating an instance of the store, telling it where your Drupal instance lives. And then you can call the getObject method and specify node-recipe, and you get a list of recipes back. Or you could provide an ID and get a specific resource back from JSON API. And this is an example from Next Drupal and their client, and it looks pretty similar. Import the client, tell it where your Drupal is, and you can call getResourceCollection for node-article. But there's definitely variations on this theme, and these packages will serve slightly different needs and priorities. Some of them are framework specific, like Next for Drupal's client has things baked in about both React and Next.js, which makes it a little bit harder to use outside of the context of Next.js, which I know some people have wanted to do. And all these projects have, different maintainers with different priorities, different availabilities, all of that thing. So, it's another reason why I think there would be value in a more kind of Drupal community-driven version of this concept. So all the people who have solved this problem in one way or the other could be wrong, but personally, I don't think so. So going back to Pitch-burgh, what we committed to as part of that funding was a vertical slice proof of concept, and then a proposal for the Drupal JavaScript maintainers, also kind of touching on that concept of offering something like this under the Drupal namespace on NPM, and a 1.0 release of a JSON API client, just kind of something to orient our scope around. And then even prior to being selected for funding, to kind of help us put the pitch together, there was just a really simple demo created, which kind of got at this concept of a implementation and a design that can support multiple clients. So JSON API is in core, but there are definitely a lot of people using GraphQL. There are other types of endpoints that you might want to interface with in Drupal. Maybe in the future, there's going to be some cool new thing that we don't even know about yet. So the idea here was to have a base class that we can, individual implementations can extend. So this is actually our first little demo. The implementation obviously has moved on from here, but the general concept still very much applies. So on the left here, you see a JSON API client response, and you're calling get collection and passing in node recipe, and you get a JSON API response, unsurprisingly. And for the GraphQL client, you're calling the query method and providing a query template string. And here we're just getting the titles of nodes, so that's the shape of the response that we get back from GraphQL. Looking at the code a little bit, let's see here. I zoomed in, so hopefully that's big enough. Cool. And these are pretty simple examples anyway. So this is what the base class looks like, the API client base class. And again, this is a really stripped down demo. But there's a couple properties, the base URL and the API prefix, and then a custom fetch option. So it implements one method, which is fetch in this case. So this is the thing that both of the clients will need to use. And if you provide a custom fetch, it'll use that. And if not, it'll just use traditional JavaScript fetch to get data. And then looking at each of the clients, this is the JSON API client. It extends that API client base class. And it provides a different default for the API prefix, JSON API in this case, and implements a getCollection method where you pass in a resource type. And then based on that, it figures out what endpoint at JSON API it needs to talk to, and then uses the fetch provided by the base class to talk to Drupal. And then GraphQL is a pretty similar concept. Different default API prefix here, GraphQL, unsurprisingly. And it implements a query method. So you provide your query as a string, and then it figures out what the right endpoint for GraphQL on Drupal is, and then makes a post request here with some authentication, stringifies your query in the body, and then returns the response. So, pretty simple example, but that whole concept of, things that are kind of shared across different client implementations, things that are more Drupal specific would live in the base class, and then the client implementations that extend it should be able to do less work and be more useful more quickly. So going back to the Pitch-burgh work, we did, in fact, complete what we committed to and released 1.0, which is fun and exciting. We're at 1.2 right now. We've had a few minor releases since then. Definitely have some things we're working on in the issue queue. And just to show a little bit more about what the client can do right now, we'll just take a look at the docs a little bit. Knowing that it is, late in DrupalCon and we can probably only spend so much time in the docs, just to kind of outline a few more things that it can do so you can kind of understand what's possible. And another thing that is cool about the docs in general is that they are a decoupled Drupal site that actually uses the client itself. So it's an Astro project. It uses Starlight, which is their docs template. And it has integrated code examples that use the client with a variety of different frameworks. And it also runs on GitLab pages as well. So a couple simple examples. This is like a hello world example basically with the client. You import the client, you create your instance of the client, and then you can call getCollection for articles like we've seen before. This code example is an Astro template, which is nice because it's pretty, abstract and framework independent. If you haven't used this before, basically the top block is your JavaScript and the bottom block is your markup. Simple. And then once we get the result back, we iterate over the results and spit out a list of articles like we see below. So also in the quick start, there's some instructions on how to use this with different package managers. It's also offered, you can use it on CDN instead as a ES module. So there's instructions on how to do that. And then just going into a few more examples. So, we saw our hello world type example before. This is basically the same thing, but for recipes. So yeah, there's an extended JSON API tutorial, but I'll just show you a few key things just to touch on a few other features. But yeah, so we have a list of recipes, and now we want to do something more like display a grid. So, we added some styling here, but now we want to add some fields into our results. So, we have those back on the response, the JSON API response, so we can print out the difficulty, have links to the individual routes. But one thing that we might want here is the image. And without going like all the way into the JSON API tutorial of this, if you've used JSON API, you might know that things like referenced entities aren't available in the response by default. You have to provide a query string parameter to include them, and then they're provided in the relationships object, and you kind of have to traverse that to get at them. So there's a few things that make doing something like that a little bit easier here. So you can provide a query string option when you're calling any of these methods to just pass any query string parameters to JSON API. Additionally, so this is a really simple example where we're saying include field media image. But if you had something more complicated, there is the Drupal JSON API params package that's been out in the community for a while, which is great, and just provides a few helper methods to more easily construct the query strings that you need to pass to JSON API. And it can just spit that out using the getQueryString method, so you can use it with this package. So that can make it easier to provide the necessary parameters for JSON API. And now we can get our recipe images in our grid here. But I did kind of gloss over a little bit what we had to do to get at that. So as I mentioned before, the things that are included, they're like referenced by ID, and then there's the relationships object in the response. So on that default response, we had to kind of do a little work to drill down and go through all of those relationships to get at the file entity URL. So another thing that's common in some of these clients, and that this project supports as well, is serializing or deserializing the data. So you can deserialize it to kind of flatten the response out. So a package that works well for this is JSON. So you can provide that as a serializer option. And then if you do that, the response that you get back will be nice and flat. So the field media image, for example, is on the top level of the response, and all of the related fields are kind of right there. You don't necessarily have to traverse through everything to get at those relationships. So it kind of depends on what exactly you're looking to do there and how you want your data to be structured. But that allows us to go recipe, field media image, thumbnail, URI.url. Long, but easier to get at. And then a few other kind of more Drupal specific things. We can work with translated content. So if you have a site that is localized, you can provide a default locale when you're creating an instance of the client. So here we specified ES, and now we have our Spanish versions of recipes. You can also override that on individual requests. So if you had a Spanish default, but you needed an English version of a recipe, you could pass in the EN locale. And then another thing that kind of falls into this category that is, kind of a shared thing, especially across clients, is authentication. So there are a lot of scenarios, especially in decoupled builds, where you'll want to make authenticated requests to Drupal. And that, is certainly a solved problem, but takes some work to get right, doing things like managing tokens, etc. So a lot of that is provided on the base API client class. So there's a few methods that we currently support. Basic authentication, which is probably not what you want to use in most cases, but is something that's supported by core. So we wanted to support that. So you can pass in an authentication option and your credentials, which hopefully are provided by environment variables. We also support simple OAuth. So this will handle negotiating the token, checking if it expires, getting a new token before before making the next request. And then you can also provide custom authentication. So if you have your own authorization headers, you can provide that. So this is all something that's available in the base class and available to any of the clients that extend it, so you won't have to spend time implementing this. And there's definitely a lot of opportunities to support more use cases here. Any kind of community feedback is welcome, and this is definitely something that I'd like to see us expand some more. Just a couple other things to note before we get out of the docs is there's examples with frameworks. They're all pretty simple. The package itself is framework agnostic, but you might want to know how you'd use it with React or Vue or Svelte or web components, or even in a progressively decoupled Drupal type of scenario, or with Next.js or Astro. So there's all simple examples here. Definitely a lot of opportunities for us to expand out the examples here too. And then there's a full API reference that's included as well if you really want to get down into the dirty details, that is generated from our code comments and typedoc documentation. All right. Goodbye docs for now. Some other things that just to note that the client can do that we didn't quite cover, it can handle caching. So we have a default cache that we ship with, but you can also provide your own as long as it matches a certain signature. And that allows you to, it will check the cache first and provide the result from that if it exists. And then if it's a cache miss, it will make the request back to Drupal. So that can save you a lot of talking back and forth over the wire. It supports all JSON API CRUD operations, so you can delete and create things through the API client. We saw you can provide a custom fetch method, and that can be especially useful if you need to handle headers in a specific way or deal with cache tags. And also there's default logging provided, but you can also pass in your own logger. And just to kind of wrap up, what we had in the initial 1.0, there were definitely a lot of interesting things around developer tooling that we did over the course of the project, especially thinking about this from the perspective of, a general project on Drupal.org. So it was written in TypeScript. You can use it with or without TypeScript if you want, but the actual client itself was written in TypeScript. We did document a few adjustments on top of Drupal's coding standards to support TypeScript. So I wonder if that might be something that could be used by the community. Although I'm sure that if they haven't yet, the Experience Builder folks are also going to have to define some TypeScript coding standards. We use tsdoc and typedoc to generate our API documentation that'll all automated out of code. For a package manager, we use PNPM, which has definitely gained a lot of adoption. But the reason why we standardized on it is, one, it's very fast. But the biggest thing is that it's really great working with workspaces and monorepos. And we have multiple related packages all in this one monorepo, so it made it a lot easier. And in my opinion, it's a pretty big improvement over what Yarn does there. We use Vite and Vitetest for our test suite, ESLint and Prettier, unsurprisingly. We've also automated all of our NPM releases on Drupal GitLab. We needed to work with the JavaScript maintainers a little bit to get that going in the early days, but we're using a package called ChangeSets, and they actually do have a GitLab port of that. So basically how that works is that if something gets merged to the main branch that has a change set, it'll pick up on that, figure out which packages need to be published, what the version dependencies are, and go to town, which is awesome. And then, we touched on using Astro and Starlight. And we use GitLab CI both for publishing the packages, for hosting our docs, all that good stuff. So you also might wonder, hey, what about that money? Remember that money from before? So some things that we have done with the funds. We established an open collective. I wanted to try to, make this transparent. It was my first time doing that. There definitely were some challenges in establishing an open collective. It did really restrict kind of availability to our funds in a way that I probably should have anticipated, but didn't. And then also we did pay contributors, but wish we could have done more. We still do have funds. So if anybody is interested in working on some issues in the issue queue, we certainly would be open to doing that again in the future. But the biggest thing is just the kind of increased visibility, right? It made a lot of people aware of this project. We had something we committed to, we got it done. It's probably why I'm standing here right now. So that was, one great side effect of this money. But we do also have, a cushion left over. Could definitely sponsor some more time. But another simple thing is that it helps for maintenance and hosting. We have a demo instance set up, and costs money. So thinking to the future a little bit. Now that we've hit 1.0, what's next? There's a lot of things that we could do next. From my perspective at this point, the biggest thing is trying to drive adoption. This whole idea of a more community-driven client, hopefully someday offered out of the Drupal namespace. For that to achieve what we want it to achieve, people need to use it. It needs to solve actual community use cases. to be successful. So we're definitely trying to prioritize issues and use cases that come out of the community. So any feedback would be really welcome. There's a lot of opportunities for documentation that we saw. I'm happy with our docs, but there's definitely more that we could do. We do have a start on a GraphQL client that we're hoping to finish. And I think based on some of the things we'll talk about in a second, that hopefully will drive that forward. But we have a clear set of issues around that if people are interested in contributing. I think there's some cool opportunities around TypeScript and just handling types and deriving schemas from Drupal that this kind of presents, but there's still more work to be done and more ways to make that easily repeatable. The concept of publishing it under the Drupal namespace, we have an issue in the ideas queue. We've shared things with the JavaScript maintainers. There hasn't been a lot of traction around that yet, which, to be honest, makes sense. I think that if adoption picks up on this and people are using it in interesting ways and it proves valuable to people, it'll make that discussion a lot easier. So really, at this point, I think it depends on the project's success. But yeah, the biggest thing at this point, I think, is that we need more adoption to move this forward. So beyond just trying to be open to how the community is using it, one other thing that I have been working on is yet another in the long line of starter projects. So this one is called Sanctuary, and it is an Astro starter kit. I just really love Astro as a project. There's a lot of ways that it feels kind of Drupal-y to me, which could be a good or a bad thing, depending on your perspective. But yeah, describe it as an enjoyable project scaffolder for decoupled Drupal explorers. So what is it, actually? Similar to other starter kits, it's a set of Astro starter kits, want to support both JSON API and GraphQL. Astro has this concept of the dev toolbar. So we built a dev toolbar app that I think is pretty cool. And there's some things we can do with inferring types. And also there's a set of Drupal recipes so that it's easy to get things up and going quickly. There's integrated preview, and it uses the front-end editing module, and we'll see all that in a second. But part of this from my perspective is just I really enjoy Astro, and I've been following along with Astro's development. But also, I think another way to kind of drive adoption of a client like this is to have a project that uses it well, and then maybe people will understand, how they could use it elsewhere. So I'd hoped to have this published and launched by now, but that didn't happen for a variety of reasons. But hopefully soon, but I can give a little sneak peek demo here. And the cool thing about this is I think it really, a lot of this demo is just taking, using the client, but also taking a lot of the cool developments that have happened in the Drupal decoupled ecosystem recently and just kind of stitching them together, which is fun. So let's take that quick sneak peek. So this is a site that was installed using the recipe. One thing that I learned earlier in the week that I had no idea, and I'm excited to tinker around a little bit more, is you can now, through Project Browser, install recipes in the UI, which is amazing. So we'll just take a look at a simple piece of content here. This is just based on one of Astro's default starter kits. This is using the decoupled preview iframe module maintained by the folks at Octahedroid. Just a simple approach to this. You have your iframe here. You can have a link out to the standalone Astro app. So we see it in the iframe, and then it also handles draft preview. So if I go and edit here and just add a quick hello, got to make it big. So I can go and preview this using the standard preview button, and it gives me a preview URL, and this is my current working draft of the content shown in my Astro app. And if I go back to editing here, I have my editing context, but if I go back to view the content, it's the current published version of the node. So that's using Drupal's typical storage for preview, so it's not a revision. You don't have to publish the content, anything like that. And then there's also the Astro toolbar. Currently I'm using that to tie in with the 1x's front-end editing module. which is also very cool even outside of a decoupled context if you haven't tried that out yet. And I think there's a lot of different possibilities here as far as like valuable things that could be provided from this toolbar, UX improvements, etc. But so for now, if I just toggle on the toolbar, it's kind of similar actually to, I don't know if anybody was in Ben's talk before this, which was very awesome and mind-blowing. But they had the being able to show like template suggestions in context like this. Kind of a similar idea, but yeah, so it recognizes all the things that are sourced from Drupal here, and I can highlight them and see exactly what I'm working with. And then if I click on the button to edit them, an iframe flies out here, and I can make changes and save them. So I can even do that with a menu item here. And if I do that and save, it reloads the iframe, and now I see my updated menu item. The front-end editing module also handles preview in some interesting ways. I haven't yet been able to implement that, but I'm also hoping that it'll be possible to do some of their live preview sort of concepts here in this decoupled context as well. Yeah, and I think there's more that the dev toolbar could do, just providing debugging information, even that example that Ben showed in the previous session about just literally just you can console log the current context of any element on the page. That could be super useful too. And then, yeah, beyond this, one other thing to show quickly is, so I talked about VS Code is where I need to be. Yeah, I talked about TypeScript and schemas. And again, I think there is, with JSON API and also GraphQL, which to be honest, probably handles that use case a little bit better. But I think there's still a lot of opportunity to be able to derive your content model from Drupal, to be able to work with it more easily in your decoupled application and also have type safety and all that good stuff. Astro does some cool things around this. They have something called content collections. And then also, they ship with Zod, which is a package that lets you define schemas that's gaining a lot of popularity in the JavaScript ecosystem. So all of that together makes it possible to do things like this. So right now, I don't think this is the implementation that we would ship with, but there's a script that you can run, which basically just talks to JSON API to get an example JSON response. And there's a package that allows you to create a Zod schema from that. So the schema that's used here is just completely automated based on what JSON API provides. And then by using that, you just get nice auto-suggest. And also, you can use a lot of, you can derive types from it as well, so get a lot of type safety in your app. But like, if I was to just start typing in articles very terribly, whoops. So article dot, and now I get a, the wonderful type ahead for all of the fields that are in that JSON response, which, I'd have to look or console log or debug or whatever. And if I wanted to, use the image, I can, drill through and, was it URI, et cetera, et cetera. And I even have, my GitHub auto suggestions here too. But yeah, opens up a lot of cool possibilities with type safety, because otherwise defining these schemas manually, it's going to help a lot, but it is a lot of work. All right, doing pretty good on time here. Let's see, what else? Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, so that was the fun sanctuary stuff. Certainly keep an eye on that. And this is definitely kind of in the hopes and dreams area, but working at Chapter 3, I've become a little more involved with the Next.js for Drupal project. And I think this presents like a really good example of how a client like this could be used in the community and how I envision it. Even though I work for Chapter 3, there are no concrete plans for this. Right now, the client that they have meets a lot of people's needs. I'd love to see a future, we're going to talk about it in a second, where it would make sense to use this client in this context, but this is just how it would fit the use case. So you may or may not be familiar with Next.js and their kind of recent architecture changes around the pages router and the app router. Even though we are doing good on time, we're not doing so good on time that I will be able to explain all of that to everyone. But the super high TLDR is that the pages router was their initial router. It was definitely more kind of page and route driven. It still exists and is still supported, supposedly indefinitely, but now they default to something called the app router in more recent versions. And that uses React server components, and it is a little bit more kind of application-based and handles nested routing really well. But it is a pretty meaningful architectural difference in Next.js. So the next Drupal wanted to support the app router, and I believe we have a beta release out currently that supports the app router. John Albin, who I wouldn't be surprised if folks in the room know from the Drupal community, did a lot of this work and refactoring. But here's how he approached it. So there was the existing client, and he basically turned that into a Next Drupal base class, and then extended that class for to create a Next Drupal class, and that's basically the app router view of the world, and then extended Next Drupal base for the Next Drupal pages class, which is the pages router view of the world. So just in and of itself, I think some of the work here was actually being done in parallel to some of the work that we were doing on the API client. But I think it is a positive thing that this is pretty similar to kind of the general approach that we were taking with the client as well, and having that base. So it actually would map really nicely to something like this. So if Next Drupal was to use this client, that Next Drupal base it would probably have to extend it, but it would extend the Drupal API client. And the idea there is that that would handle all of the really common Drupal parts of this: authentication, fetch, caching, et cetera, a lot of the things that all these clients are doing over and over. And then that next Drupal base class would just implement the things that are, specific to React or specific to Next.js, but shared by these other clients that extend it. And then Next Drupal and Next Drupal pages would pretty much be the same at that point. But again, this is kind of the whole idea, right? Provide this base used by the community that hopefully could allow a project like Next for Drupal to focus on supporting Next.js's specific features more quickly. And then also, there is the elephant in the room. And I don't know, is that a phrase that translates outside of the US, or is that a weird thing to say here? Maybe so. Anyway, the elephant in the room, I think, for like every talk this week is Drupal CMS and Experience Builder. It's interesting to even be talking about Decoupled right now. Is Decoupled the way forward? Who knows? This is like the most liquid time for Drupal ever. I'm not even sure what Drupal is at this point to some extent this week. But regardless, I don't think these decoupled use cases are going to go away. And I think that Drupal CMS and Experience Builder can actually make them better and open up some really interesting possibilities. So a really simple one is that I would expect a client like this to support things that are prioritized in Drupal CMS. So, the modules that are going to be packaged as part of Drupal CMS's default recipe, we should make sure that you can use them in a decoupled context really easily. So that's, pretty low-hanging fruit. And, also there's the concept of a decoupled recipe. Maybe that will exist at some point in the future. I mean, right now, that actually feels like a similar problem to what this client was trying to address, in that a lot of people out in the community are building their own decoupled recipes that have a lot of overlap. And then there is Experience Builder, which, it's going to be interesting to see what use cases Experience Builder will open up or possibly even prevent. Hopefully not, but who knows? It might make something like, the concept of decoupled layout builder, which there have been various efforts around, more possible. I try my best to follow along with some of the Experience Builder work, but unless you are working on that full time, it's very hard. But at least early on, there was a concept kind of core to it of having JSON storage in Drupal. as opposed to the PHP serialized array that ends up there for Layout Builder. And that theoretically should be a lot easier to work with in a JavaScript context, so that might make some things possible. There's all the exciting AI stuff we've seen this week. And I think something that is definitely within the realm of possibility is creating an agent to be able to build framework components based on your Drupal data model. And then also there's the exciting stuff about the trial experience that you may have seen this week, running Drupal in WebAssembly. And that really starts to get close to being able to work with SQLite at the edge, which is libSQL or Tersos, the productized version of that. And if Drupal could support that in the future, basically all of Drupal could sit next to each other at the edge or wherever your users are. So who knows how all of this is going to shake out? But I come to DrupalCon to get excited about the exciting things, and these are the exciting things. And also the scary things. So anyway, I also want to thank everybody who's participated in the project so far and those who will in the future. I see some of my friends and contributors in the room, which is amazing. Thank you so much. If you're interested in getting involved, the project on Drupal.org is API_client. We have an API client channel in Drupal Slack. I'll be at Contribution Day tomorrow if you want to chat about this or work on some issues or not. I'll still be there. Also, in half an hour, I believe Lucas is leading a Let's Talk Headless BOF. So, not exclusively about this topic, but very relevant things. I'll be attending. If folks want to keep the conversation going, should be great. Marky also at karaoke last night asked me to put up a slide for Decoupled Days, which if you're in the US or interested in traveling to the US, is a great conference focused on this topic specifically. They took last year off, but they are planning on doing it again in summer 2025. Can't recommend it enough. And I think we have a little time for questions if people have them, but in general, thank you.
Thank you, first of all. It's really exciting and gives us an impression we have to go and try this at home. My question is around the performance. It's a big subject. So I was wondering, when the API has a latency issue or if there's like some sort of restriction, is there a better way to handle that? Because obviously it's a front end. So if there is like anything that we can do offline, but providing a seamless experience to the users in the meantime.
Sure. Yeah, the question, in case this picks up on the recording, was around performance and latency, like if the API had a latency issue. Yeah, the hope is that we're providing some of the tools to address that use case. Things like caching should allow you to cache responses locally so that you don't have to request it multiple times. There are definitely ways that you can adjust headers when making responses so that you can cache things at the edge. But I think another big opportunity with this package, but also just the decoupled space in general, is to be able to handle Drupal's cache tags better. And if we use Drupal's cache tags, we could make sure that we're only making requests when the content changes on the Drupal side, and know that. So that definitely is a concern, and hopefully there's some things that make that easier, but also certainly not foolproof. That is, one of the challenges with decoupled in general. Thanks. All right, cool. Thanks, everybody.